Welcome to Visual Fantasy Book Recommendations, the channel dedicated to fantasy and science fiction book summaries, reviews, and recommendations. It is very helpful if you hit the like, comment, subscribe, and share. Help build my channel, and let's take a look into the best fantasy and sci-fi realms out there. Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone who just finished a book, and they can't quite meet your eyes. Not because the book was bad, but because it wrecked them in the best possible way. Their voice gets quiet when they try to explain it. They stumble over words, trying to capture something that feels too big, too personal to articulate. That's the face of someone who just closed the final pages of Robin Hobb's Assassin's Quest. Today's conversation centers on a book that doesn't just tell a story. It asks readers to live one. Not the glamorous, Instagram-worthy kind of living, but the raw, messy, beautiful, and occasionally devastating kind. The kind where you come out the other side fundamentally changed, even if you can't quite explain how. Robin Hobb's Assassin's Quest, the conclusion to her Farseer Trilogy, sits in that rare category of fantasy novels that transcend their genre. Sure, there are kingdoms and magic and quests, all the trappings readers expect, but strip those away and what remains is something far more intimate. A meditation on what it means to survive when survival feels impossible, what it costs to remain loyal when loyalty demands everything, and how we construct identity from the rubble of our shattered lives. This exploration will dive deep into why this book resonates so powerfully with readers, what makes it different from the 1,000 other fantasy trilogies crowding bookstore shelves, and whether it deserves a spot on your ever-growing reading list. Here's what can be said without ruining anything. Assassin's Quest returns readers to the Six Duchies, a kingdom facing threats both external and internal. At the story's center stands FitzChivalry Farseer, a royal bastard, a trained assassin, and a young man whose entire existence has become a battleground between duty and desire, loyalty and self-preservation. The first two books in the trilogy establish the world, introduce the players, and set the board with political intrigue and mounting danger. This final volume takes everything built so carefully and pushes it to its breaking point. But here's the thing, this isn't primarily a story about saving kingdoms or defeating dark lords, though those elements exist. It's fundamentally about one person trying to figure out who they are after losing everything that once defined them. Fitz embarks on a quest that spans landscapes both physical and emotional. Along the way, he encounters allies and enemies, magic that offers power at terrible cost, and questions that have no easy answers. The journey tests him in ways that go far beyond simple physical endurance. It asks, how much of yourself can you sacrifice before there's nothing left? When does loyalty become self-destruction? What remains of a person after they've been broken and rebuilt multiple times? The magic systems woven throughout, the wit, which allows bonding with animals, and the skill, a dangerous telepathic power, aren't just cool fantasy elements. They become metaphors for connection, addiction, codependency, and the ways people reach out desperately for others even when that reaching might destroy them. Most importantly, this is a story about relationships. Not romantic relationships exclusively, though those exist. We're talking about the complicated bonds between mentors and students, friends who've grown apart, found family members who can't quite speak their love aloud, and the kind of loyalty that persists even when it probably shouldn't. Every relationship in this book feels lived in, textured with history, and refreshingly free of easy categorization. Let's start with the heart of why this book works. Robin Hobb writes characters who feel uncomfortably real. Her protagonist, Fitz, isn't your typical fantasy hero. He's not the strongest, the smartest, or the most charismatic person in any room. He makes mistakes, big ones. He fails repeatedly. He can be stubborn, self-pitying, and occasionally frustrating. And that's exactly why readers can't help but root for him. There's something profoundly human about watching someone struggle not with dragons or dark wizards, but with their own limitations, trauma, and inability to let go of the past. Fitz's greatest enemy isn't some external villain. It's his own capacity for self-destruction, his inability to value himself, and his tendency to give everything until there's nothing left. The supporting cast defies every fantasy stereotype you can imagine. The fool, Fitz's closest companion, exists as one of the genre's most fascinating enigmas, prophetic, otherworldly, yet capable of devastating emotional honesty. Their friendship with Fitz transcends typical fantasy companionship tropes, offering something deeper, stranger, and infinitely more meaningful. Then there's Burrich, the gruff stable master whose love language is harsh criticism and impossible standards. Patience, the eccentric noblewoman who provides maternal affection in her own chaotic way. Verity, the prince whose duty slowly consumes him. Every character carries scars, makes questionable choices, and exists in shades of gray rather than clear-cut moral categories. What stands out most is how these relationships resist simple definition. Love doesn't always look like love. Loyalty can exist alongside resentment. Friendship can hurt as much as it heals. Hobb understands that real human connections are messy, contradictory, and complicated, and she writes them with unflinching honesty. Beneath the fantasy trappings, Assassin's Quest wrestles with questions that matter in the real world. Identity sits at the core. Who are we when everything external that defined us, our roles, our relationships, our place in society, gets stripped away? When Fitz loses everything that gave his life structure, he's forced to confront what remains. The answer isn't always pretty or heroic. Loyalty gets examined from every angle. The book asks, what do we owe to others? At what point does loyalty to someone else become betrayal of yourself? When is it noble to sacrifice everything, and when is it just slow suicide? These aren't rhetorical questions in Hobb's world. They're dilemmas with real consequences that Fitz must navigate without clear guidance. The concept of cost permeates every page. In this world, nothing comes free. Magic demands payment. Love requires vulnerability. Survival often means compromise. Every choice leaves marks that don't fade. This isn't a story where the hero emerges unscathed, where power can be wielded without consequence, or where doing the right thing guarantees a happy ending. There's also something profound in how the book explores trauma and recovery, or the lack thereof. Fitz doesn't bounce back from hardship. Terrible things leave lasting impacts. Healing isn't linear. Sometimes the best you can do is learn to carry your scars and keep moving forward. For readers who've experienced their own struggles, this emotional honesty can feel validating in ways more triumphant narratives never quite achieve. Robin Hobb writes with a particular intimacy that some readers find hypnotic and others find challenging. Her prose doesn't rush. It lingers. It sits with emotional moments until they become almost unbearable. She trusts readers to appreciate the quiet scenes, the internal reflection, the slow build-up that makes eventual climaxes hit with devastating force. This isn't action movie fantasy. Readers looking for constant sword fights and magic battles might find themselves frustrated. But for those willing to invest in character and emotion, Hobb's pacing becomes one of her greatest strengths. She understands that the most powerful moments often happen in silence, in a look between characters who can't voice what they feel, in the moment someone realizes they can't go back to who they used to be, in the quiet decision to keep going despite everything. Her world-building operates on a similar principle. Rather than overwhelming readers with exposition dumps about history and geography, she reveals the 6 duchies and surrounding lands through Fitz's subjective experience. The world feels real not because of detailed appendices, but because of how naturally it emerges through character interaction, cultural assumptions, and the way setting shapes psychology. The first-person perspective intensifies everything. Readers aren't just observers. They're trapped inside Fitz's head, experiencing his pain, confusion, hope, and despair directly. When he's lost, readers feel lost. When he's in agony, it's visceral. This creates an almost claustrophobic intimacy that makes the story unforgettable but also emotionally demanding. Hobb clearly isn't interested in writing fantasy as pure escapism. She uses the genre's tools, magic, quests, political intrigue, to explore genuinely difficult human questions. Her purpose seems less about entertaining readers and more about making them feel, think, and perhaps recognize parts of their own struggles reflected in Fitz's journey. This is fantasy for people who felt broken. For anyone who's wondered how to keep going after loss. For readers who understand that sometimes there is no victory, just endurance. Hobb respects her audience's intelligence and emotional capacity, trusting them to handle complexity, ambiguity, and discomfort. The intended audience isn't everyone who likes fantasy. It's specifically for readers who value character over plot, who appreciate emotional depth over spectacle, who want to be moved rather than just entertained. If someone's idea of fantasy is grand battles and clear-cut good versus evil, this might not hit right. But for readers drawn to authors like George R.R. Martin, Patrick Rothfuss, or Ursula K. Le Guin, writers who use fantasy to explore humanity, Hobb offers something essential. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.